Hello, this is my Unreal project, and I guess I'll just get straight into it. The thing that I tried to do with my Unreal project for this semester was to try and parallel Crash Bandicoot. It's one of my favourite games, and I like the mechanics that are in it. So, one of the biggest things obviously I needed in the game was crates, and the crates play a big part in my Unreal project. If we just drop out the game real quick and have a look at the blueprint for the crate. Just drag it over here. We'll see that the crate doesn't actually have a lot in it, but that small bit of code is pretty powerful in my eyes. This function is one of the most key parts of the crate blueprint. This function gets called in the player blueprint whenever you hit a crate, and what this function does is it decrements the hit points by the specified damage value. The reason I used a specified value rather than a literal is mostly because, just in case I wanted to for some reason have different damage values apart from just 1 or 0. It decrements hit points and sets it equal to the new value, and then calls the death check function. This death check function checks the value of the crate hit points, and if it's 0 or less, then it will spawn the box break sound, set the isDead variable of the crate to true, and then call the hide crate event. And the hide crate event will check to see if the third person character, if it has access to the third person character, and will then try and increase the crates destroyed variable in the character by 1, and then it will spawn fruit based on the fruit value of the crate and give it a little offset here. And that's more or less all there is to it. There is also this function, this little part of the blueprint here as well, which will decide whether or not the crate should be rendered and its collisions calculated based on whether or not it is dead or not, which is set in death check. This crate blueprint is also a parent blueprint to the question crate that I have in my game, which is here. This is a data only blueprint because the question crate doesn't add any extra functionality to the question crate itself. It just uses different fruit values. So instead of spawning 1, it spawns 3. I could use this form of inheritance to expand to create all the other crate types in Crash Bandicoot, like the bouncing crate that has 10 hit points and only spawns 1 Wumpa each time, or the mask crate, which gives you an extra hit before you lose a life, things like that. I found this to be a lot better for expanding the game than simply creating a new actor, repeating the same blueprint code, and so on and so forth, and this is a much better way of doing that. It isn't really a major part of the crate blueprint. I just think it's a pretty neat part of the crate blueprint is this little thing here, this little selection of floats. What this basically does is this whole formula here is dependent on the fruit value of the crate, and it will loop through the amount of fruit that there is, and every time it spawns a fruit it will set it by an offset in its transform so that all of the Wumpa fruit don't stack on top of each other. This basically means that when you hit a question crate, all of the Wumpa will spawn in a little circle or close together rather than stacking on top of each other. It makes it a lot easier to read, and I just quite like it. It's a nice, neat little function that I've got here. One part of my game that I really like is it wasn't a strict requirement of the assignment, but pretty much every action in this game, pardon me, has a sound attached to it. For instance, the attack animation, the jump, and the land, and also footsteps. Also, whenever a crate is destroyed, whenever a fruit is picked up, and also at the end of the level, whenever a gem is picked up. I added this in just because I felt that any game that doesn't have sound, unless that is the point of the game, it makes the game feel very small and a bit dead, and it adds a lot to a game if you put sound in. The game doesn't have music, unfortunately, because I couldn't find any particular track that I wanted that sounded right in the game. Here is the gem sound, one of them. And I felt that putting all these sounds in would make the game seem more make it seem like the game has more substance than it actually does. Putting sound in the game is a great way to do that. On the topic of the footstep noises that I made earlier, this was really interesting. The way, well, to me, the way that I did this was usually the way I would have done this is through the actual blueprint of the third-person character by including some kind of delay then play noise node set up on the movement input. The problem with that, however, is the movement input works off every tick, so whenever you would press down, that would generate a sound every tick, even if there was a delay, so it would create a horrendous noise. So the way that I did this was by going to the anim blueprint of the actual player and putting this setup here, which responds to an notify event, which is in the run animation of the player, and will spawn a sound at the location where the impact of the foot hitting the ground is. And this is also dependent on the physical surface type that the actor is moving on. At the moment there is only one surface type, which is ground, and that doesn't really matter to me. I'm not trying to make this some super complex system of wood sound, stone sound, whatever. But I think this is a really cool idea for if I ever want to expand on this game, I can then just add the physical materials, like I am walking on stone now, I need to use this sound, or whatever. And this is actually, seems to me like a much better way of making footstep noises than trying to wrestle with the third person character's tick function to somehow make the sounds play at specific points in time. It's a lot easier to just make it play on the animation, specifically where in that animation you want the sound to play. I was talking earlier about parallels to the Crash Bandicoot game and how I was trying to emulate the features in that. One of the features in the Crash Bandicoot game is in every level, if you get all of the crates in that level, then a special gem will appear at the end to mark the fact that you found all of the crates and destroyed them. And I have put the same thing in my game. I have almost got all the crates here, as you can see, and if I just destroy all these crates, then the crate will spawn at the end. I haven't put any animations for it spawning in. I don't believe there is any in Crash Bandicoot. I don't think it needs any animations either. But to just make them seem a little bit more special, these gems have a small diffuse light under them just to make them stand out a bit more, and also have a little sound attached to them. They don't interact with the UI of the player at this time. I would like to add that in the future, but I just like being able to pick things up and they make noise. It's just a fun little thing that I added. One of the things that I wanted to implement into my game was to make a proper respawn mechanic, as before I got this implemented, the level simply reloaded itself. The way I got around this was by putting a variable in the crate blueprint that would determine whether or not the crate rendered and its collisions were calculated. This meant that when the player died, I could just simply toggle the variable to such a point that the crates would respawn properly. And I also set the player to set its transform to the original spawn point upon death, as I will now demonstrate. I have destroyed some boxes and I'll destroy this one here and jump in the water real quick. And the player has respawned, the crate number has reset itself, the lives have gone down as well, and as you can see in the distance, the crates have respawned. One last thing I wanted to show was the end of the level, which completes the gameplay loop and allows the game to just keep repeating itself however many times the player wants it to, rather than the game going on for eternity. This little light that you can see here just in front of me is the end of the level. I added the light here just so that it was clear where the actual end of the level was, until I may eventually put some kind of podium there so that the player can clearly see where the end of the level is. And all this simply does is when you walk into it, it opens the main menu, which is here. And these buttons do what they say on the tin, really. The quit button will quit the game, and clicking play will reopen the first level, although this could be set to open an overworld level like there is in Crash Bandicoot, which will then further open more levels and allow you to keep track of all the stats and things like that.